I'd like to thank everyone for coming out this afternoon, and welcome to our third Sunday afternoon lecture series. This week we featured one of our own board members, Beverly Belcher-Woody, and she grew up in the Stewart area of Patrick County and graduated from Patrick County High School. And immediately upon graduation, she went to work at Bassett Walker and worked there and at Pluman for the next 15 years. And after the textile mills all closed, she went to Patrick Henry under the Trade Act and then earned her paralegal degree. From there, she spent the next 15 years as the deputy clerk for Franklin County Circuit Court and Henry County General District. While working in the court system, she earned a bachelor's degree from Old Dominion University. At the age of 50, she decided to make a drastic career change and go into education. From there, she is a sixth grade history teacher at Marksville Middle School, and she and her husband Mark live in the Snow Creek area of Franklin County with their dog and 2 cats. They have a son and a daughter, 5 grandsons and 1 granddaughter, and she writes a weekly local history column called Patrick Pioneers for the Stewart Enterprise. She's a member of the Daughters of the American Revolution and serves as the regent for the Patrick Henry chapter. Thank you all for coming, and welcome to the mic.
Thank you all so much. I'll try to remember to use my teacher voice. We worked on that yesterday. Grave said you got to remember to use your teacher voice. So if I get a little bit low, just tell me I need to speak up a little, okay? All right, first of all, I would love to know, by a show of hands, how many of you have ancestors from Rock Castle? Yeah, awesome. I really appreciate everybody coming today. This means a lot. This is my passion. And everybody knows from hiking Rock Castle, when you go to hike Rock Castle, you see the mountains and you see the beautiful flora and fauna and the creeks and the streams coming from every direction, but you don't see the farmers that were plowing their fields 100 years ago. You don't see the mamas rocking their babies. You don't see the kids playing in the creek. So I'm hoping with my presentation today, I can give you an idea of the people that lived in Rock Castle and how much they contributed to the community. Now, when I say Rock Castle, I'm talking about just what's on your map. Now, before 1872, all of Woolwine was Rock Castle. In 1872, the name of the community was changed to Woolwine in honor of the postmaster, Thomas Woolwine. So the whole community was called Rock Castle at one time. But what we're focusing on is the actual gorge that's between Belcher Mountain and Rocky Knob. That's what your map is of. And I thought you could kind of follow along. There'll be a test afterwards, so just get ready. But I thought you could kind of follow along, and when I'm talking about somebody, you could find their home place on the map.
Point it this way.
Point it.
Point it this way.
Is it off? Okay. So this is one of my very favorite people in the whole world. This is Isaac Underwood. He was my great uncle. He was the brother to my grandfather. He was a Civil War veteran, a reluctant one. He was conscripted into the 51st Virginia Infantry. And after the war, he became a traveling photographer. What I would not give for his slides, but unfortunately, nobody seems to know where all of his slides are. But he kept this amazing journal. And I just want to read a little bit from the journal about what he said about the residents of Rock Castle. Okay. There were but a few stone chimneys. Benjamin Belcher, one of the best and wealthiest neighbors, owned one of these and also had shingles on his house. And I suppose he was worth about $600 or $700 and was called wealthy for that section. He always made corn to sell and sold it for 50 cents a bushel. And he dropped that 50 cents in some place of safety and never spent it unless it was for taxes or something that he was compelled to buy. And that was not much, for he tanned his own leather and he made his own shoes, and his honest wife made the clothes for the family, and they raised their own rations and they ran their own kingdom. And he was called a miser because he saved his own money, and he owed no one, and nobody owed him. And he was as honest as a man could be. And he lived 98 years, and his good and honest wife lived some 90-odd years too. And she too died beloved and respected by all who knew them. Now there's a little bit of discrepancy right there with that 98 years, because on his tombstone it's got that he was born in 1779 and he died in 1884. So that would be 105 years old. But regardless, God blessed him with a long life. If you're interested in learning more about Isaac Underwood and people in Rock Castle, because he goes into detail about a lot of families in Rock Castle, there you can go online, and there's a website called Isaac Underwood, His Life and Times. And the actual journal is online. So, and it's fascinating. It is really fascinating. Okay. All right, this is Miss Beulah Edwards' store. How many of you are familiar with the upper parking lot where, like if you're on Willis Road right below Slate Mountain Church, where you can park to walk down in the gorge? Okay. Miss Beulah Edwards' store was right there in that curve. This was the lifeblood for this community. Everybody brought their eggs there. I still have the basket where my dad carried the eggs to the store to get money. They took the chestnuts there to get cash. We were sad when the road was redone and the store came down, because I can remember this store. Okay. Now, a lot of people don't realize that Rock Castle was on the original Appalachian Trail. The original, when I was a little girl, Daddy showed me an AT marker, a concrete AT marker, and I don't know if it's still there today, but it's right at the top of the gorge, right across from Slate Mountain Church. There was a concrete AT marker there, but the original Appalachian Trail just sort of coasted along the top of Rock Castle. And the shelter that you see was built by the CCC boys, and it was built for the Appalachian Trail because the Parkway hadn't begun yet. So this was for the this is an Appalachian Trail shelter. Of course, now if you've hiked in Rocky Knob up at the park, you know this is still there. Earl Schaefer wrote a book called Walking with Spring, and in it he describes how he arrived there that night. And he also mentions a lot of other people in the community, like Ewell Handy, Alma Craig Handy. There's a part in the book about them. But he says, I finally stumbled into Rocky Knob by starlight and found the shelter was of stone, open on 3 sides and with a cold wind howling through. I gathered some snags for fireplace wood and a sack full of leaves to cushion the stone. The temperature must have been around freezing. Okay, so this is the whirly cabin that's at the top. This is at the part where, and unfortunately it's fell down now. This is pictures from the 1970s, but the Tom and Jathina Worley lived in this cabin, and that's kind of a misnomer. They call it the Worley cabin, but she actually lived there with her first husband, Samuel Wood. So Samuel Wood died when he was very young, and then she married Mr. Worley, and they lived in this cabin. And this cabin is on the same site as the Rocky Knob housekeeping cabins, if you all are familiar with those. Those were built by the CCC boys too in 1940 and 41. Now, unfortunately, they have not been taken good care of for the last 10 years or so. And so I'm on a letter writing campaign. I'm trying my best to, and I'd love for you all to help, write letters. They haven't used the housekeeping cabins in over 10 years now, and they are just falling down. They are so neglected, and it really hurts because at Ferrystone, the CCC cabins up there were recently restored. They look brand new. But the difference is these cabins in Rocky Knob are owned by the federal government, where the Ferrystone cabins are maintained by the state government. So I have talked to Asheville. I've talked to the Park Service. They are not actually against the state taking over the cabins. So if you need information about who to write, where to write, I can give you my email because it just breaks my heart to see these cabins decline, because most of these boys, after they built these cabins in 40 and 41, they went off to World War II. So, this is a lot of history here that's just being lost. Okay. Do those two look like arch enemies to you? Well, okay. So on the left we have Captain Rufus Woolwine with the 51st Virginia. And then on the right is Miss Sarah Belcher Hubbard. When she was 12 years old, she was probably his worst nightmare, because he was put in charge of getting men to join the 51st Virginia Regiment, which that Rockcastle area covered. Well, she was in charge of taking food to the men that were hiding in the caves in Rockcastle to avoid conscription, including her dad, John Belcher. So she would wade the creek. I'll read a little bit about what she says about that. But several of the men hid in Rockcastle in the caves, and she would wade the stream. Well, let me just read what she says about her time. Okay. All right. She's one of my favorite people too. You'll find out I have a lot of favorite people in Rockcastle. She's one of my favorite people too, because she only came to Stewart. She had 10 kids. Her husband died in 1904, and she was left, the youngest one was 7 years old, and she lived to 1949. And so anytime I get overwhelmed, or I always think, well, what would Miss Sarah do? Because she only went to Stewart one time in her life. Okay. So this is what she's saying when she's 93. Miss Sarah Belcher Hubbard, whose home is in Patrick County, about 15 miles from Stewart, is in Roanoke getting her first glimpse of city life. Miss Hubbard, who's staying at the home of her daughter, believes in living in the country, and when asked how she likes Roanoke, she replied, "I'd rather be at my old den. It gives me more pleasure than anything." The longest trip she's ever taken previously was from Buffalo Ridge to Floyd, and she's never been to Stewart but once in her life. Only slightly hard of hearing, Mrs. Hubbard uses glasses when sewing, but demonstrated her ability to thread a needle without them. She does all of her own sewing, including making dresses, and she knits and crochets. She remembers all too well the hardships endured as a child, both during and after the war between the states, and the many times their food was confiscated. Mrs. Hubbard relates how she used to wade the branch when the snow was shoe-mouth deep to avoid making tracks when carrying food to soldiers in hiding. She also added that she didn't have her first pair of shoes until she was 12 years old. Both her father and her husband, who was 10 years older than she, were wounded or shot but recovered from their wounds. They eventually found them and conscripted them. And then, like I said, when her husband died, it was in 1904, and she had 10 children and when he passed away. So she would wade the creek so she wouldn't make tracks. Then, this is amusing, then Captain Rufus Woolwine, he kept a diary too. And so he says, I'll just read you briefly, and this is in the museum in Stewart if you're interested in seeing it. But there received orders to report to camp at Glade Springs with my detachment. On the 12th, I reached Abington. On the 13th, I went to Lynchburg. On the 14th, to Stanton. On the 15th and 16th, I laid over. On the 17th, from Stanton to Lynchburg. On the 18th, from Lynchburg to Christiansburg and to Denny Sauer's house in Floyd County. On the 19th, I came home. On the 22nd, I went to Floyd Courthouse. On the 23rd, I came back home. On the 27th, I went to Patrick Courthouse and back home. On the 29th, I arrested the Fishers and took them before Esquire Henry Terry. They were evading capture. On the 30th, I came home. And then that was July. August 1863. August the 1st, I went to hunt the Belchers. Well, he didn't write anything else. For 10 days, he didn't write anything else. And he never mentioned that he found them. He never mentioned that they were arrested and brought, to put in the 51st. But then finally on the 10th, he says to D. Sowers and Ford. So apparently, if he had found them at that time, he would have wrote it down, I'm sure. But that, to me, I always thought that was amusing. That a 12-year-old girl could keep men hidden from grown men. Okay, all right. Now, this is my grandfather, great-great-grandfather, Reed Belcher. He didn't evade capture. He was conscripted into the 51st. But of course, he lived in Rock Castle too. He was the brother to John, that Sarah that we just looked at. That was her, Reed would be her uncle. I had the service records from where he was in the 51st, and just a short time after that, he left and went to Ohio and joined the 23rd Ohio. What was so interesting about this was at the time he joined, his sergeant was the future President William McKinley. So William McKinley started as a private, but he advanced very quickly. So he wasn't Grandpa's sergeant for very long. But the ironic thing is that, of course, you got to remember that in Rock Castle in Virginia, when he went west, there wasn't a West Virginia yet. So when he crossed the Virginia line, he was in Ohio. So when he joined up with the 23rd Ohio Union Army, the first thing they did was send him back to Southwest Virginia. The first battle that he fought was, one of the first, was the Battle of Cloyd's Mountain. The 23rd Ohio was sent to try to destroy the salt mines and lead mines and things like that. So when the war was over, he was still in Southwest Virginia, so he didn't have far to come back home. So that was a blessing, and he did come back home, thank God. Okay. Now this is about the snazziest dresser you'll ever see right here. That's Henry Tuggle Brammer. He was charged with gathering volunteers in Rockcastle. He lived in Rockcastle. But if you'll go to the next page. This is the actual sheet of paper that he carried in his pocket. He had it folded 8 times. That had a list of all the volunteers that was from Rockcastle. That has all the names that you can see, Lee, Dillon, A.G. Nyland, McAlexander, D. Hart, Boyd, Belcher, Hilton Hall, Harris, Ayers, Connor, Vaughn, By, Wood, Woolwine. So this is actually a 2-page document, if you want to go to the next page. And the actual 2 papers are in the museum in Stewart. But he kept those folded neatly. You can see where he folded it. And he had to keep a record of who volunteered for the 51st. Okay. All right, now, this is sort of a little tribute right here to Squire Dillon. Squire Dillon, he was sort of a Renaissance man. He lived, of course, he lived in Rockcastle. He was a teacher in Patrick County for 30 years. He was Justice of the Peace. His grandmother was a Dillon, and they moved from Dillon's Fort over in Fieldale when his grandfather Dillon, William Dillon, passed away. So they moved to Rockcastle from the area, the Dillon's Fork in Fieldale. But he was quite a remarkable man. He was elected county constable at age 21, and of course then you couldn't vote till you were 21. And he laughed that he cast his first vote for himself, which was pretty cool. He wanted to be a surveyor in addition to teaching school, so he took correspondence courses. And he became a surveyor. The 2 gentlemen on the far left in that picture, nobody seems to know who they are. The gentleman in the middle is Squire's son, Guy, and he became a park ranger for the National Park Service, Guy Dillon. And of course that's Squire, and then the gentleman beside him is Edgar D. Hart. And if you go up in Rockcastle, and you're on the C.C. Camp Road, you'll go by a real pretty old house that nobody lives in. It's got huge boxwoods in front of it. That's Edgar D. Hart's house. He built that home. But Squire, he sort of motivated me to start writing about local history for the newspaper, because he wrote a local history column for the Floyd Press. And so some of his words I'll be taking from the history that he wrote for the Floyd Press. And if you're interested in reading what Squire Dillon wrote, it's available online too. If you go to the Library of Virginia and then go to the Virginia Memories section, there's all these newspapers that you can look up and read. And they have the Floyd Press available online, so you can read his articles, which are fascinating. He was a brilliant man. Okay.
Would you say that again, please, where you can find that?
Oh yeah. If you go to the Library of Virginia, and then you'll see a tab that says Virginia Memories or Virginia Chronicle. I think there's 2 or 3 ways you can get in it, but Virginia Memories, Virginia Chronicle, and then there's a whole bunch of newspapers that you can choose from, Virginia newspapers. And his articles were in the Floyd Press. This picture here, me and my mama was trespassed to get this picture. It was off a tombstone, way up in the woods a long time ago. You remember that, Mama? But this was Isham Cockrum, and he was the fife player for the 51st Virginia. And these words are Squire Dillon's about Mr. Cockrum. Isham Cockrum and William McGee of the Rockcastle Creek vicinity served as musicians during the Civil War. Mr. Cockrum being fifer in Company G, commanded by Captain William Price, and Mr. McGee being a drummer in Captain Rufus Woolwine's company, known as Company D, both companies belonging to the 51st Virginia Regiment. Mr. Cockrum was the father of 6 sons, and all of them were experts with the fife and drums. During the administration of A.J. Montague, governor of Virginia, the ex-Confederate soldiers held a reunion at Stewart. Captain Woolwine paid Mr. McGee's expenses to Stewart and back to his home in Pulaski County, just to have him beat the same drum during the parade that he beat during the entire Civil War. Governor Montague spoke at the reunion. Arriving at Stewart the day before the reunion, Governor Montague was domiciled at the Stonewall House at the head of Main Street, then occupied by Captain G.T. Mumford. Captain Woolwine led a fife and drum corps, which consisted of fifes, kettle drums, and bass drums. Mr. McGee beat the kettle drum and serenaded the governor. The governor was enthusiastic over the performance. Okay. And this is the Rockcastle Band. When I look at these gentlemen, and I think about how hard their lives had to have been, and I think, how in the world did they have time to create a band and play anywhere? I just think about just surviving was a miracle. And in my book, it's just surviving. And for them to have the gumption to form a band and go places, and like they would play like picnics, 4th of July, stuff like that. But Squire is the second on the back row, the second from the left. His son Guy, right here, is the second from the right. And of course there's Edgar Deehart again, the one that has the house there, that's still there on C.C. Camp Lane. He's on the left. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to find anybody that can identify the other gentleman. But I sure would love to have saw them play. Okay, this is Rockcastle School. Rockcastle School, 1903. Now, this isn't the school that my grandmother was born and raised in Rockcastle, but she was born and raised up, she lived at the top of Rockcastle. So this school was down at the very bottom on C.C. Camp Lane. This school was. Now, my grandmother went to a school at the top. She would have to hike out of Rockcastle every day, and her school was called Stamping Birches, B-I-R-C-H-E-S, the Stamping Birches School, and it was directly across from Chateau Morset Winery. Where the actual road where you go to the winery. Directly, there's a big outcropping of rocks right across the road, and that's where the Stamping Birches School was. So she would come out of the gorge every day and walk to school. So if you lived at the bottom half of the gorge, you went to this school. And there was also a French Boyd school that some of the children in Rockcastle went to, and it was near where, if you know where Villa Appalachia is on the Parkway, then that was near the French Boyd School. Okay. All right, so, oh, I get you to go back, I'm sorry. I had one more little thing about the school. This is what Squire Dillon says about the school. The first public school in the Rockcastle community was established in 1880. The citizens of the Rockcastle community, realizing the importance of educating their children without financial aid from either the state or county, built a log schoolhouse. This building was erected along the same architectural ideas as were used in the Goblin Town schoolhouse, and boy, I'd love to have a picture of that. The Rock Castle Schoolhouse had a chimney with a 6-foot fireplace in one end and one window in the opposite end. The window consisted of a rectangular sash 12 inches wide, and I had to read this over and over to make sure this was right, 15 feet in length. 15-inch boards were placed under the window, held in place by wooden pegs which served as a writing desk. The floor consisted of wide, rough boards manufactured at, and this is where I need your help, at an up and down sawmill. Does anybody know what an up and down saw? The only thing I can think of is maybe portable.
It's a pit saw. Pit saw. Matter of fact, it was up until 1840, and when they brought up the circle saw, they got all upset and had a fight because the circle saw was going to put them out of business. One man pulled it up and the other man pulled it down, and the saw this way is called a pit saw.
Well, how about that? I thought maybe it was a portable sawmill or something.
It'd be a pit saw. One of those blades would be on display here in the museum. We have one.
Well, how about that? Thank you for that, because I didn't know what that was. Yeah, so he says that the boards were manufactured at an up and down sawmill. The lumber being green when the floor was laid, it shrank as it seasoned, leaving wide cracks in the floor. When a pupil dropped his pencil, he considered himself lucky it did not fall through. A crack in the floor. The benches were made of slabs obtained at the up and down sawmill. Holes were bored in them, and wooden pegs were used as legs for the benches. There was no weather stripping or ceiling used, so an application of red clay was used to keep out the wind and the snow. Those were stern days for the pupils. Some of them walked from 2 to 3 miles to reach the schoolhouse, from 4 to 6 miles a day through snow, rain, and sleet, and walking to and from school, and then having to wear their wraps in the school to keep them from freezing.
When you look at the board, the pit saw, it's covered the pit saw, the board is straight lines up and down. You zigzag a little bit, but a circle saw, the lines are curved. That's where you can tell whether the board is something like pit saw or circle saw.
Well, thank you for that. I had no idea. Thank you. All right. Okay, this is the children of, you remember the gentleman that was dressed so nice and had the riding chaps and all that stuff on? Okay, well, this is his children and their spouses. All of these folks that are in this picture either lived in Rock Castle or one ridge over in what they call Brammer Spur. So they all stuck pretty close to home except for one, James Matthew Brammer. He's the gentleman on the far left on the back row. All right. Here's an earlier picture of James Matthew Brammer in the center. And he married Nancy Evelyn Boyd from Rock Castle. And they had 3 sons, and then she died in childbirth. He married Helen Brammer from Rock Castle. They moved to Decatur, Texas. And then when she died in 1905, he came all the way back from Texas. You can't find a good woman in Texas, apparently. He had to come all the way back to Rock Castle to get another woman. So he came all the way back to Rock Castle, found Josephine Lee, another Rock Castle name, and then they returned to Texas where he raised his large family. She helped him raise his large family. So I thought that was pretty special that he had all those kids, and what a task it must have been in 1905 to travel from Texas to Rock Castle. But he did it. And I just love this picture. This was taken in Rock Castle. Here's some more of Henry Tuggle Brammer's descendants, some of his grandchildren. You may recognize some of these names. The Brammers had a bluegrass group for a long time. But I just think that this picture sort of goes against the traditional pictures we see of mountain people in the media, and I just think they're just beautiful, beautiful children. Okay. How many of you saw that house before? Okay, now for the last 50 years, it's been owned by the Austin family. And it just recently, this past month, got a bath and a new coat of paint. And it was built in 1916. And Dover Dalton was hired to build it. And Matt Connor hired him. That's who owned the house. He paid him $1 a day, and it took 600 days to build the house. They set up, it may have been one of those up and down sawmills, they set up a sawmill there on site and cut the poplar trees to build the house. But thankfully, the Austin family has been really good stewards of this house. It's meant so much to our family. Matt Connor, he was an orchardist. I think it's the next picture. Well, no, that's what. I guess that's all I'll say. About Walter Weaver. Walter Green Weaver did the trim work on the porches and stuff, and that's another thing. All this trim work with hand tools just blows me away. I don't know how he did it, but anyway. He is the gentleman that built Bob White Covered Bridge that we lost a few years ago. So, and he was also the local coffin maker. If you start doing a lot of genealogical research on the families in Rockcastle, you're going to see his name a lot as the undertaker. And basically the undertaker just, built the caskets. When you go in, it's 2 rooms. It's when you first walk in, the living room's on the right, and then the bedroom on the left, and then you go straight back, and then there's a big dining room, and then behind that, in the tea part, the one that sticks out, is the kitchen, and then upstairs, it's 2 bedrooms, just 2 bedrooms on each side, just one on each side. And they had a pretty good sized family. If you want to go to the next page, I can show you a little bit about what the ceiling looks like. All right, let's get back to Reed Belcher again, Grandpa Reed. Okay, Grandpa Reed was the dad of Matt Connor's wife, Annie Laura Belcher. That would be my Annie Laura and my great-grandmother were sisters. Annie Laura and Matt Connor's the one that built the house. But when Grandpa Reed got old, he started staying with them in the house. And in the house, and they're still there, thank God the Austins have left everything pretty much like it was when the Connors lived there. The hooks in the ceiling, and that's in the front left room, like when you walk up on the porch, the left room there has these hooks in the ceiling. And Grandpa Reed slept in a hammock suspended from those hooks. And we all feel like it was because, he said he would never sleep on the ground again. So I suspect after 4 years during the war of sleeping on the ground, and he said, no more. So he slept in a hammock, and he was sleeping in his hammock when he passed away. And the picture there of Grandpa Reed is in front of the Connor house. You can see the railings and recognize that. He lived, he was quite elderly he didn't pass away till 1931, which is pretty darn good for a Confederate veteran. So, anyway, that was where he lived out his final days. Now this was his original house, and it's at the top of the gorge. When you start down in the gorge, and it's on your map, when you start down in the gorge, his is one of the first places you're going to see when you start down, like from the housekeeping cabins. It'll be on the left, and unfortunately, since that picture was taken, the chimney has fell over. That's me and my son about 30 years ago. but unfortunately now the chimneys fell over. And then that's Grandma Sarah, that's Grandpa Reed's wife. Okay. And then here's Matt Connor, the one that built the house, with his son, that's his son Blaine. And everybody worked for the Connors during apple picking time. They had a huge orchard. If you are at the Connor house, well known as the Austin house now, if you're at the Connor house, if you look across the creek, you can see remnants of the old apple orchard up there. If you go across there, you can see the orchard. There's still a few trees left, but they would take apples. I don't know if he did, Ike DeHart, was across the ridge with his distillery, but I don't think during this time they provided that many apples for him. I think most of his, from what I'm told, they took them in a wagon to Stewart, and at the time, of course, the Dick and Willie was still running in Stewart, and they would load the apples, and they would sleep under the wagon at night, and then bring the wagon back home. Okay. And then here's Matt Connor's wife. This is Annie Laura. That's taken behind the house, the Connor house. And there are two of her girls, and here's two more that just amaze me. How, living somewhere as isolated as they were during World War I, they just pick up and move to Fort Dix and become nurses. And they came back after the war was over, and they each brought a husband. So, and they remained here in Virginia. Okay. Now, this picture right here, on your map, you'll see where it says Henry Hilton Mill, but the person that wrote that spelled Hilton, and that may have been how they spelled it then, I don't. It's Hilton, where we spell it now, Hylton. But this was the miller on the left, Henry Hilton, and his beautiful family. And then on the right is, this is my grandma, and that's my great grandpa Till Underwood. All of these little girls were born in Rock Castle. And what's so interesting though about these two, notice the backdrops are identical. So I like to think, I can't prove it, but I like to think that Isaac maybe took these pictures, or some, that Isaac Underwood maybe took the pictures, or somebody using his equipment. But anyway, you'll notice that the mother's missing on this one. So if you want to turn to the next page. So this was my great-grandmother. She died giving birth to the little girl, the little baby that was in that picture before. And his home place on your map, it says Till Underwood. If you go up in Rock Castle, about halfway up, there's an area called Tater Hill. And that's where the switchback is, where you go over to the Bear Rocks. That's where their home place was. That's where my grandmother was born. It was always called Tater Hill. But their chimney still, last time we was up there, it was still in good shape. Okay. Yeah, that's the home place. You might recognize that if you've ever been on that switchback where the Bear Rocks are. But my Aunt Edith said that there were all kinds of carvings. They would go in the caves to rest in the cool. They would be hoeing corn, and they would just take a break in the caves, and there was writing all over the caves. Now, I don't know if it might have been from the soldiers that were hiding in the caves, or if it was maybe even further Native American. I don't know, but I think that's fascinating to think about. Okay. And then here's some more carving. You can't really see it that well, I don't think, but anyway, that's my Uncle Rucker and my Aunt Lola Harris's initials when they were courting that chimney that was in the previous picture before this one. If you look in the mantle, you'll see these initials, and he carved those when they were courting. He would come down in the gorge to court her, and he carved her initials in that, and you can still see them. They were married 72 years. Okay. And on your map, this is the Sam Underwood house, and he also married another Belcher girl. It was 3 Underwood boys in Rockcastle that married 3 Belcher girls. And so he also married a Belcher girl. And he's the brother to my Grandpa Teal. And his house, actually, he used a Delco generator, and he had lights in his house in Rockcastle. So,
He took a Delco generator, he took the motor off, he ran it with a water wheel. That's how he ran it.
yeah.
That's with a specialized, modified Delco generator.
Yeah, and you know that water wheel is still, you can still see remnants of it down
I
there.
remember it was still there, golf man, cats, but they hooked the generator to that water wheel. That was the difference.
Yeah, that was really remarkable for the time. But anyway, that's his
I think
children.
you run with 2 or 3 light bulbs at a time, it wouldn't hold up.
I imagine if you didn't have any, that'd be a whole lot, wouldn't it? Okay, and here's, now we're moving up to the CCC camp times. Okay, so all the residents have moved out, or most of them, and through eminent domain, or willingly sell to the park. The CCC boys have came to town, came to Rockcastle. And if you're interested in reading these newsletters, they are also online through the Library of Virginia. They're pretty funny too. They're pretty amusing. Some of them are. And the name of, if you go online, they're called, the newsletter through the Library of Virginia is called The Knob. The Knob. And, okay. And they had some amusing things that they would say. They would make up jokes. Of course, this was all handwritten by the boys there at the camp, and some of them were real cute. Okay. And this is Alan Dehart. I don't know if some of you are familiar with him. He was real instrumental in the Mountains to the Sea Trail. But he was born and raised close to Rockcastle, and he actually, before the new 58, if you go up 58 towards Medicine, but you know in that curve where it said the Dehart Botanical Gardens to the right, of course now it's gone because of I'm hoping that they'll put another entrance there, but he donated a lot of land on what we call Lover's Leap Mountain for botanical gardens, as well as some other gardens in North Carolina. Okay.
Do you know who his folks were?
Yes. Yeah, and actually he has a sister that's still living.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'll get you, Jean, I'll get you that information.
Okay.
And he was a water boy for the CCC camp. And he loved hanging around with those older guys. He's like 12, and you know, these guys are like 18, so they were super cool guys, you know. And I love this quote that he, in one of his books, talking about Alan Dehart. He grew up in Patrick County in the path of the original Appalachian Trail. In the late 30s, he volunteered to carry water to the men digging it out of the hillside. One day he asked one of the workers where the long trail went, and the man rested on his shovel and shrugged. I guess it goes all the way to heaven. And I have to agree with that, I think. These are some of the folks that lived at the top. When we think about Rock Castle and the Gorge, of course, these folks lived, you know, where the saddle is. They lived close to the saddle. This is the Compton family. And this is the view from their home place down in the gorge. Look how open it is. It's just nothing but fields, and it was just all open. It's amazing how much that the forest has reclaimed that land, because it used to just be open fields down in the gorge. Okay. And if you're interested, this is on Route 8. You can, there's a produce stand called Wade's Orchard, Wade's Produce. Okay. Well, this is some of their family, and they lived in Rock Castle, like going up the Route 8 side. Like if you're going up Route 8, look over in there and where that drop off is. Okay, that's where they live. And if you're really interested in learning more about them and some more Rock Castle folks, there's a wonderful book called Appalachian Photographs of Earl Palmer. He came in during the 50s and took some amazing photographs in Rock Castle. And these pictures, these two are from his book. And then here's a little story that everybody has told, so I'm sure it's true. It's about the traveling peddler, but it'll give you something to think about if you go up there and park at the lower, on CC Camp Lane. When you go up there and park, in the lower parking area, look to your right on that little knoll, and that's where the peddler was buried. This was around 1850. He didn't stay with anybody, and so, you know, he refused people's offers to stay in their barns, and a few days later they found his suitcase and a gold cane beside a log. On further inspection, they found him in the log, and so they cut the log off on each end, just enough to where they could bury him, and he's still buried there. And that's up on the little knoll there at the parking area. Okay. And I know we're running short on time, so I'll pick it up a little bit. I just want to show you this to give you something to think about. You know, believe it or not, sometimes our government has an agenda. I didn't know if y'all knew that or not. Okay. Well, their agenda was, we're going to make Rock Castle a place as backward looking as we can. So we're going to tear down these brand new modern houses that have white frames and you know, these up-to-date houses like you'd see anywhere in the middle of town. We're going to tear those down because they don't fit our agenda. Okay, same thing with Ed Mabry's house in Mabry's Mill. They tore it down, and it was a white, beautiful frame house. The only one that survived, of course, was the Connor home. And at the time that they were going in and buying all these through, or taking through eminent domain, there was not enough money in the budget to buy the Matt Connor home because it was so big and modern, and because of the orchards and all the land was worth so much, they didn't have the money to buy the Connor home. The government did not have the money. So that's the only reason it was saved and saved from destruction. But here's one home. It was only 4 years old when it was torn down. When the Parkway came in, they tore it down because it was too modern. Right. There's another one. Okay. And of course, that's the CC camp. That's the road that's going in. Yeah. And there's another more modern house. That's at the CC camp. You still see part of that bridge laying in the creek now, that concrete bridge. Okay. Okay. All right. Now, real quick, I want to just real quick. I'm sorry, y'all. I know I'm long-winded, but when I get on this, I just don't know when to quit. Okay. All right. So this was in 1838. Now, everything we've been told about mountain people, you think they wouldn't even know who their president was, would you? Well, in 1838, these War of 1812 veterans in Rockcastle was having this big old, they called it, in the Republican style, barbecue to celebrate the nation's 62nd birthday. And the actual news of this event made the Richmond Enquirer, August the 3rd of 1838. So if you're interested in reading, if you're interested in reading the newspaper article, you can go online to the Library of Virginia and go to the Richmond Enquirer, and you can pull this up from August the 3rd, 1838, and it's all it tells the whole celebration. And if I can just read real quick a couple of the toasts, because I thought this was really interesting. It says that after the company of volunteers under the command of Captain Burwell Hatcher had been paraded and performed the duties on parade, they were marched in company with a large and respectable portion of the citizens of the neighborhood to a beautiful grove on the bank of the creek to partake a barbecue furnished in the old Republican style for the occasion by Colonel William Ayers. All right, so then it says, the whole of which was done in the true Republican style, the table then being cleared, the following volunteer toasts were drank. So I'm not sure if every time that they somebody said something, they took a drink, but I think they did, because you'll notice the toasts start getting funnier. So like this one by William Dillon, I'll just read. The memory of General Marquis de Lafayette, the compatriot of Washington, the friend and ally of the United States, and the great apostle of democracy. Okay. All right, the next one. Let's see. Is that the one with James Hatcher? Yeah. By James Hatcher, France and her people, people in free principles who yet remain to be taught that 25 millions, whether of money or of men, can neither allure nor alarm a republic nation from the path of honor. And then they start saying poems on the next one, talking about Martin Van Buren, good master Van. He'll do you all the best he can. Okay. I like this one, William Moran. He toasted to Archibald Stewart, Esquire, and our faithful representative in Congress. May he be elected again. Okay. And we'll skip to the last slide. See how many toasts they made? Well, back one, I'm sorry. Okay. Is that the one with Donald?
The third from the bottom.
Donald? Let's see. That might be it. Captain Ben Price? Yeah. Yeah, so they're just feeling pretty good. This was close to the end of the party. So, does anybody want to read what Captain Ben Price said? To the fair sex, the most valuable and indispensable gift divinely bestowed upon men, callous indeed must be the hearts of those who willfully remain in a state of celibacy. And actually, if you want to email me, I have transcribed this whole document into a Word document, the whole thing, so I can send you, so you don't have to try to, do like I did. And I think Dr. King's got something he wanted to share too.
Rockcastle Gorge the Indians were there until 1840, and they were originally lost because of these crystals, and this is the original crystal from the Rockcastle Gorge. There hasn't been one found for the last 60 years, so that's pretty rare. So that's a true crystal from the Rockcastle Gorge. Looks like a castle.
If you have any questions or anything, my email is really, really easy to remember. It's rockcastlecreek1, just the number 1, @gmail.com. So if you want copies of any of these documents or a transcription of the barbecue from 1838 or anything, just email me, shoot me an email, and I'll be glad to send it to you. Yes, ma'am.
You really had some good photos of your early families, and somebody did a good job on preserving those.
Yes, I have to thank my precious grandmother for that. And quite a few of the photos, back in the 90s, me and my mama, who's here, Mama and Daddy, went around to all the older people and started begging for pictures. You know, just, can I please take a picture of your picture? And so that's how we got a lot of those. But my precious grandmother, who was born in Rockcastle and who lost her mother when she was only 6 years old, I think that had a long-term effect on her as far as you know, recording history and keeping things and saving things, and so I'm so grateful for her for that, because I know she'd be pleased with this. Yes.
One of the things that caused Rockcastle Gorge to fail too, they never used any fertilizer. They used fertilizer and said by the time, and in 1930, the weeds wouldn't grow in the fields, it was so dry, so dead, but there was no fertilizer. So that was one of the big reasons to call Rockcastle Gorge, along with the prohibition and the loss of the nuts. But that made a big difference.
Did anyone have any questions or? Yes.
The Mr. Belcher that first served in the Confederate Army and then went to Ohio and served, he came back. What's the story of how was he received by Patrick County people after he was?
Well, I would say he was received very well, because the sentiment in Patrick County was that I'm surprised that Patrick County is not West Virginia now, because they were very pro-union, and even with Jeff Stewart being, you know, born and raised there, he never said anything. He said sometimes the kids would tease him about it, but as far as having problems with, because everybody, especially in that community, you know, was so pro-union, and you know, these were mostly subsistence farmers, and they, you know, didn't have, you know, more like what maybe the other side of the county, where the rentals and things were, that, you know, that had felt, you know, wanted to preserve the slavery aspect, but he wasn't. He came right back home, you know, because when they finished, the war was over, they were still, he was with Hunter, I guess, at the end, and so he was, when the war was over, they were still in Southwest Virginia, so he didn't have far to go back home.
So is it your impression that most of the men from that area of the county that ended up fighting for the Confederacy were impressed into service rather than volunteering?
Absolutely. Absolutely. One story I don't share is kind of painful. Grandpa Reed's father, Benjamin Belcher, the first one that when I was reading, Isaac was talking about, they were pro-union, and the Home Guard was coming around confiscating food, horses, anything they could get, and saying they, you know, for the war effort, but who knows. But anyway, they were looking for the Belcher boys, and of course, you know, they were hiding in the caves up in Rockcastle, and they took a rope and tied it around Grandpa Benjamin's neck and hoisted it over a tree and would raise him up to try to get him to tell where his boys were. And but he didn't do it. He didn't do it, and finally, his wife Sarah Of course, everybody was hungry, starving, you know, in those times. And she finally came and said, well, Benjamin's supper's ready. And they all went, even the home guard, they all went and sat down together and ate. It was a confusing time. It was a very confusing time. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Beverly is a new board member with us here at the Historical Society. She sat in for her first meeting just Wednesday of this week. And she's a teacher at Martinsville Middle School and has brought her classes here to the museum twice for tours and classes, and we look forward to a lot more of that collaboration. And also, Beverly is the only person who can hold this one designation, and she is the first bronze level member of the Historical Society. We have new levels of membership now because we have such a big deal museum coming, and you'll hear about them. But the bronze level, among other things, it's the first tier that gives membership in the North American Reciprocal Museum Association, where if you have a membership card here, you are granted admission to 700 different museums across the United States and 600 in other countries. So we thank you all for being here. We've been asked, and we can tell you, the annex, which is behind us, should be open, ready to the public in about December or perhaps January. As we speak, construction is nearly almost finished. Construction is done. A few touch-ups on the painting is what's going on. Shelving is being ordered and is being built for everything, and then the antiques will start moving over, and these are world-class collections of antique firearms going back 500 years, Native American artifacts going back to AD 1200, tools, trains, steam engines, train whistles, Markland trains, and there's gambling parlor and more categories of items. We recently sent out this newsletter. Raise your hand if you have received it. I figured about half of the people in here I recognize as being on the mailing list. So I have newsletters. For those of you who do not have one yet, I'm going to try to beat you to the door there and give these out. But they have a lot of history, a lot of local history articles that I think that you would find interesting, and they also have information of what we're doing here. Beverly, I can make a copy of that article in the Richmond paper. So those who would like a copy of the article that Beverly was reading up there, just see me downstairs by the desk, and I'll go make copies and I'll enlarge the text, make it easier to read, and that way you don't have to look it up online. So I will see you downstairs, and we have new exhibits that have been open for about 2 months, so if you have not been here in that amount of time, you have new things to see. Thank you very much for coming.